Thanks so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Today, climate change and terrorism are at the top of the agenda at the G7 summit in Germany. This weekend, leaders of the industrialized democracies focused on Russia and ISIS. And while sanctions against Russia will be maintained, some leaders may be starting to question America's foreign policy strategy. Gary Lane has more.
Russia missed the summit for the second year in a row. That's because the leaders of the world's top industrialized democracies kicked Moscow out of their annual meeting after it annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Russia was further isolated when the G7 countries imposed sanctions against the country last year because of Crimea and its armed support of pro-Russian rebels fighting in Ukraine. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, host of this year's summit, shared a beer with President Obama Sunday in the German Alps. President Obama revealed what was on his mind.
Standing up to Russian aggression in Ukraine.
Both Mr. Obama and the German Chancellor agreed sanctions against Russia should not be lifted until President Putin fully implements terms of the peace accord reached in Minsk last February. Putin says the West has nothing to fear from Russia. Its actions in Crimea, Ukraine, and elsewhere are simply defensive, not offensive actions. Some European officials agree, and they may move to weaken the sanctions against Russia, with or without the United States and Germany. Also of concern to the G7 leaders, the war against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. The general in charge of the effort to recapture Ramadi and other areas in Anbar province says the Iraqi military has secured the defensive lines leading to Baghdad. Still, some of the European leaders don't think President Obama's strategy is working. And with ISIS making gains in both Iraq and Syria, and Russia's Putin flexing his muscle in Ukraine and around the world, President Obama's foreign policy decisions are being called into question, not only by critics in the U.S., but also by some of America's closest allies. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Turkey's ruling Islamist party has been stripped of its parliamentary majority. President Erdogan's AKP party finished this weekend's election with about 41% of the vote. That gives the party about 258 seats in parliament, and that's 18 votes shy of the minimum needed to rule. That outcome is considered a stunning rebuke of Erdogan's ambitions to expand his powers in a new presidential system.
I want to express my gratitude and thank all my citizens who have voted. They are the guardians of democracy. I embrace them all. I hope this election will improve our democracy and freedom and spreads welfare in a far-reaching way to everyone.
Turkey now has 45 days to form a new government. As the Iraqi military struggles with ISIS, it could learn a lesson from another fighting force in Syria. Determined Peshmerga troops backed by American airstrikes helped free the city of Kobani. Gary Lane brings us this rare look inside the city after its liberation from the Islamic State.
I joined CBN disaster relief workers as they brought help to the ravaged city of Kobani. We were shocked by what we saw. As you can see, much of this town has been destroyed. The effort to drive ISIS from Kobani left much of this area just devastated. But slowly, people are coming back. The town now has a population about 20% of what it was once before. Life is extremely difficult, both for those who stayed here during the fighting and for those who recently returned. There's no running water or electricity in the city, and little food to eat. Families cook what they can, mostly beans and rice over wood fires. Last fall, handyman Motasım Koja, his wife and 6 children, fled for Turkey as ISIS fighters entered their village near Kobani.
We lost everything. Even if we could return to our village, we have nothing there. ISIS destroyed our home and took everything.
Motasım recently joined his brother's family in Kobani.
Security-wise, we have no problem here. But there are no jobs, no fuel. We have no money. And we can't afford food. We cannot keep going. We don't know what will happen to us tomorrow.
CBN Disaster Relief, in partnership with the Barzani Charitable Trust Foundation of Iraqi Kurdistan, recently delivered 3 big truckloads of flour to the local Kobani bakery. Excited employees unloaded a total of 70 tons. The bread factory is the only working bakery of its kind in the area. The donated flour was enough to provide several loaves of fresh bread for each person in Kobani, and continued employment for these factory workers. The Kobani Kurds told us their city's economy needs international help to improve. This man, Mustafa, said Turkey must be pressured to open the border so people can flow into Kobani. Only then will life begin returning to normal. And what about the fight against the Islamic State? Mustafa said Iraq can learn lessons from Syrian Kurds who had the will to stay and fight ISIS in Kobani.
We really sacrificed, and our uprising was not only for the people of Kobani, but for people everywhere. If we had fled instead of taking a stand against them, they would have followed us elsewhere.
Many people here are disgusted and angry at the Islamic State. They blame their city's dismal condition on militant Islam. Some told us they no longer want to be Muslim. We found them yearning to learn more about God's love and Christianity. CBN disaster relief team members prayed with them and handed out digital audio players containing Kurdish language Bibles.
Thank you.
And despite all the hardship they've been through, we found most Kobani Kurds warm and welcoming. And optimistic people, determined to rebuild their city and keep ISIS out.
They will not be able to stay here because everybody in Kobani will stand against them and fight them.
Otasem said the people of Kobani desperately need the world's help if they're to feed their families and rebuild the city. He also asks Christians to pray.
We cannot describe what has happened here, but you can see it on your TV screens. Christians around the world should lift up their prayers according to what they have seen.
Images of evil wrought on one Syrian city, and views of an unbeaten people in desperate need of help. Gary Lane, CBN News, Kobani, Syria.
A sixth person has died from the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, in South Korea. A total of 87 people have been infected with MERS in the country since last month. This is the largest outbreak outside the Middle East. Schools in Seoul are taking preventative measures. More than 1,800 schools have closed, and those that remain open are monitoring students and advising them to use face masks and hand sanitizer. More than 2,000 people are in isolation in their homes or state-run facilities after having contact with patients infected with the virus. Fewer people are getting abortions in almost every state. That is according to a new Associated Press survey. It finds abortions have declined in states where laws make it harder for them to have, as well as in states where abortions are protected by legislation. Abortions are down since 2010 with an overall drop of about 12%. Pro-choice advocates attribute the drop to expanded access to effective contraceptives, while pro-life advocates say the drop is due to a shift in attitudes, with more women choosing to carry their pregnancies to term. Franklin Graham is calling on Christians to boycott businesses that are funding and promoting the gay activist agenda. He made the comment on Facebook announcing his ministry is pulling its accounts from Wells Fargo Bank because it's using a same-sex couple in its ads. Graham said, "This is one way we as Christians can speak out. We have the power of choice. Let's just stop doing business with those who promote sin and stand against Almighty God's laws and His standards." Gay activist bloggers are mocking Graham, saying it will be nearly impossible to do what he says because so many businesses now support the gay agenda. Coming up, Christian leader Dutch Sheets describes a prophetic dream about boxing gloves. Hear what he believes it has to do with a third great awakening in the church. America has seen two great awakenings in its history. They were powerful spiritual revivals in the 18th and 19th centuries. And now some Christians believe we could be on the verge of a third great awakening. Paul Strand brings us that story.
I'm going to send a third great awakening to America.
A greater great awakening than the world has ever seen.
Christian leader Dutch Sheets pushes and preaches this coming Reformation almost full-time now.
Journalist and author Jennifer LeClaire writes about it in The Next Great Move of God.
What's interesting about the origins of this book is that Jennifer had for years as a journalist been observing God moving the country towards a third great awakening. But then he asked her personally to jump right in.
The Holy Spirit said, I would like you to be a participant in the revival, not just an observer of it.
So she's now bringing together Christians to pray at this Pompano Beach facility, where she also often writes. She's hoping others will seek the next move of God as well. Christian leader Dutch Sheets believes Americans must rediscover the deep links their spiritual ancestors had with the Lord. In his own new book, Sheets talks about a prophetic dream where God presented him boxing gloves.
If you're going to take out the giants in this nation, you're going to have to wear these two boxing gloves. And one said everlast, and it has everything to do with everlasting God that Abraham encountered. The other glove said evergreen. And for 6 years, I couldn't figure out what evergreen was.
Then he was presented an Appeal to Heaven flag, based on philosopher John Locke's idea that citizens who've exhausted all appeals to unjust leaders can still appeal to heaven.
And George Washington grabbed this, put it on a flag, flew it over all the naval ships. It spread through the colonies, and it really became almost the battle cry of a nation. It was the banner we were born under.
Sheets remembers the awe that hit him when he first saw that the flag carried a huge evergreen tree.
The presence of God started coming over me, and I said, I'm about to get the other glove.
His research showed him everlast and evergreen first came together when Abraham made covenant with his everlasting God.
This goes all the way back to the father of our faith. The evergreen tree has been a symbol of eternity and eternal covenant. Abraham, when he called on everlast, he planted an evergreen tree. It was his way of saying, I'm in covenant with God forever.
America's first English settlers made a covenant with God when the first thing they did was hoist a cross on the Virginia shore.
When that cross was planted at Cape Henry in 1607, God took that very seriously.
The Pilgrims and Puritans came here to freely worship and serve God and be a shining city on a hill. God told Sheets Americans must remember these roots.
You've got to go back to covenant. What did I have in mind? Why did I birth this nation? What were the promises made to me?
LeClaire hopes concentrating on what these earliest settlers and founding fathers did for God and country will drive us to our knees.
When we see and understand the price that they paid and get that revelation of why they did it, and then we see now in today's age what we've lost and what we're about to lose if we don't wake up.
Christians, though, are waking up and praying fervently across the land. Sheets sees them everywhere he goes.
That are passionate, serious, desperate, understanding our true condition. If you have to be blind not to know that America's in real trouble.
But Christian scholar Eddie Hyatt says an intense encounter with God in Hyatt's car 5 years ago showed him not to despair.
I just seemed to be enveloped in God's presence, and my mind began to be flooded with exciting, hopeful thoughts that America could see another great spiritual awakening that would change the very culture of the nation.
That night, God led Hyatt to discover America's first great awakening of the mid-1700s heavily influenced the founding fathers who fought the War of Independence.
For the first time, I saw that there was a direct connection, a direct bearing between the first great awakening and the founding of this nation.
LeClaire sees the God of liberty using that massive spiritual event.
There was a tipping point, and it led to a sort of a spirit that would not tolerate oppression and the attacks on religious freedom.
LeClaire believes now is the critical moment America's Christians must again link up with that spirit.
Will we as Christians lay down and allow Antichrist agendas to come in and push him out of the public square? Will we stand up to the attacks on our faith, the attacks on our religious freedom?
Sheets says God wants all Christians to grab up those boxing gloves and take up that flag.
You were born under an appeal to me. And when there was no way, I made a way. And no matter how bad it looks today, how big the giants look, if you'll call on everlasting God and you'll tap into that covenant, you'll take out these giants and you'll see a third great awakening.
Up next, sharing hope and a hot meal will show you how Mercy Chefs is showing the love of God to victims of the devastating floods in Texas. Well, the rain has long stopped in those flooded areas of the Lone Star State, but 2 weeks later, people are still struggling to recover and return to life as normal. We paid a visit to one tiny Texas town where residents are finding hope in each other as they sit down for a hot meal courtesy of Mercy Chefs. Take a quick drive through Wimberley, and there are still countless reminders of the deadly and disastrous flood that hit this area Memorial Day weekend. Wimberley, Texas is a retirement and tourist community, home to about 12,000 residents, many of whom call the recent flood the greatest in Texas history.
Here's one of my grandson's favorite books.
We found Steve Meeks salvaging what can't be replaced. He and his wife Cindy own Rio Bonito Resort and have 45 years of memories, raising children and grandchildren on property that's been in their family for generations.
We found out we're stronger than we thought we were, and we have a very strong faith in God. He has given us this beautiful place, and He will give it back.
That hopeful spirit is as visible as the devastation. This community is coming together and even lending a hand to those who've come to help them, like Mercy Chefs.
We've been able to do some amazing work using local people and just providing the expertise and the talent to get the food done.
Chef Gary LeBlanc and his volunteer team of master chefs travel the world to feed people in the face of disaster. They've managed to dish out 18 to 20,000 meals here in just 8 days. Although getting here was not easy.
It's incredible to look down at the river and then look 30 or 40 feet up and you see the disaster line where the trees are just completely ripped out. It was just very challenging to come in and see a flood that looked like a tornado.
The tornado-like images are still fresh on Tom Talcott's mind. The former city councilman and Air Force veteran, along with his wife, rescued 8 of their neighbors.
All of them would have been asleep, and all of them would have potentially drowned if we had not been able to get them out.
Not everyone in this town made it out of the storm, and there is still a long road of recovery ahead. But if everything is bigger in Texas, that is certainly true of the kindness here in Wimberley, where churches have become command centers for people looking to help their neighbors.
Right now, they're doing what they know to do in order to get to tomorrow. And that's a great definition of hope. Hope is expecting greater things to happen tomorrow.
And greater things indeed will happen for that town tomorrow. Praying for them for sure. Stay with us. We're coming right back. Operation Blessing is still on the ground in San Marcos and Wimberley, Texas, helping people recover from the recent devastating floods. Joe and his wife weren't able to evacuate their home in San Marcos, so they had to ride out the flooding on their second floor. Their house suffered severe damage and they lost most of their furniture, as well as their computers and appliances. Operation Blessing volunteers helped to pack their belongings, remove their furniture, and remove all the damaged drywall and flooring. The volunteers include people like Peggy Othman, a 700 Club partner who says it has been her dream to serve with Operation Blessing. A blessing out of the blue. A mom in North Carolina didn't need a jet. She just needed a car so she could get to work. This single mother of 3 had to get a ride from her dad every day. Then he had to have knee surgery. She prayed and prayed. Then something amazing happened. Her prayer was answered by a complete stranger. Connie Cole had called a dealer and the stranger overheard her conversation.
And I've been praying for a miracle, and he said there was something in my voice that the Lord was telling him to help me.
He said, if she comes in, call me. I'm going to go pray about this, and if the Lord wants me to do something on this, I may buy her that car. And we were pretty shell-shocked over it.
I was speechless. To me, that just means the Lord is out there. Keep high hopes, pray, and don't give up.
The dealership worked with that Good Samaritan to approve a 2004 Chevy Impala at cost. Connie did her part too, chipping in the $800 she had. A man named David paid the rest. Beautiful. Well, finally this hour, a message of hope to pass along to uplift you on your Monday. We call it our Monday Motivation. And this thought came to me as I prepared for work today and reflected on my Sunday worship experience. Even in a crowd of hundreds of people, God's presence makes you feel like there are only two of you in the room. Remember, in His presence, there is indeed fullness of joy. Make this a marvelous Monday. And that is going to do it for CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. We'll see you tomorrow.